Good evening. Welcome to part 2 in our Bible study on depression as we're looking at the story of Elijah in 1 Kings chapter 19. And last week we talked about some of the reasons why Elijah became depressed and discouraged after his great victory over the 850 false prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, that he turned and ran from one woman, Jezebel, Queen Jezebel. And he hid under a juniper tree and basically asked God if he could just go ahead and die. I ran across a little poem that seems to sort of describe what maybe Elijah was going through, and certainly we can go through in contemporary life. It goes like this: this is the age of the half-read page and the quick hash and the mad dash, the bright night with the nerves tight, the plain hop and the brief stop, the lamp tan in a short span, the big shot in a good spot, and the brain strain and the heart pain, and the cat naps till the spring snaps, and the fun's done. When we last met Elijah, he was in trouble. He's messed up, depressed, discouraged, stressed out, burned out, mentally strained, physically strained, spiritually out of sorts. He's exactly like the words in that poem. In fact, the next to the last line of the poem seems to perfectly describe him. If you just keep on pushing and pushing and pushing, the spring snaps and the fun's done. And for Elijah, that's what had happened. During this crisis, they've had on television several times, they've had psychiatrists interviewed, and one Christian psychiatrist was being interviewed on TV the other night, and after discussing the physical and medical factors that can lead for depression, he said something I found unusual to be said on a TV news network. He said depression can also be a spiritual issue. Now, there's a danger in a statement like that because a lot of people will read all sorts of things into it, but he said basically that he believed in using all necessary medical means, and so do I. There are some wonderful medications that are out there for clinical depression, and if people need to use them, they need to use them. They'll help them get better. Usually what's better for depression is a combination between talk therapy and the appropriate medicine. But he said, and I agree with him, there are also some underlying spiritual issues that people need to face and address. And certainly that was the case with Elijah. He was depressed and discouraged, and that's probably what led him to the position he found himself in. And because we're all made of the same clay, let's see how God dealt with his depressed prophet. First of all, he realized that his prophet desperately needed rest. And that was the only way he was going to initially begin to get over his depression. He sat under a broom tree alone in the wilderness and prayed that he might die, that God would take his life. And then he fell asleep. And watch what God did for him. It's very interesting that God let him sleep, and then an angel touched him and told him, "Get up and eat." Now, how's that for spiritual advice? He doesn't say get up and pray. He doesn't say get up and read your Bible. He doesn't say get up and sing. He doesn't say, Elijah, get up and start preaching and prophesying again and serving the Lord. He tells him to get up and eat. By the way, eating problems are one of the leading symptoms of depression. You either don't eat enough and you lose a lot of weight, or you eat too much and you gain a lot of weight. Here's a profound truth. Sometimes all we really need to do is to eat and to sleep. And sometimes we need to eat and sleep more than we even need to pray. There's a time for everything. There's a time for crying out to God, and there's a time to roll over in bed and close your eyes and get a good night's sleep. There's a time for everything. There is a time when you need a good old Five Guys burger and fries and chocolate milkshake. I threw that in there for you, Sean. We all need a good sleep and a good meal. Sometimes when we're discouraged or depressed, we just need to let our hair down and have a blast. For some people, that means go water skiing. For others, it means hiking in the mountains. For some, it means sitting in a comfortable chair and reading a great book. But that's why God commanded us to work for 6 days and rest on the seventh day. God built into the very fabric of the universe that we need to work and work hard and serve the Lord, but we also need at least 1 day a week where we have some downtime, some rest, some relaxation. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is lay down and sleep and then get a good meal, because it will help you to feel so much better. So the angel gives Elijah a very specific command. Elijah looked around, and there beside his head was some bread baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and lay down again. God's mountain man is completely tuckered out. He took a nap, he got up, he ate some food, he went back to sleep again. Is he lazy? No! He just beat 850 false prophets on Mount Carmel. He's just worn out in the service of God. So the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him again and said, "Get up and eat some more, for the journey ahead will be too much for you." And summoned by the food that he ate now twice and the 2 long naps that he took, he traveled until he reached a cave at Mount Sinai, and he went in the cave and went back to sleep again. Spent the night there. Now understand, nothing has changed. He's still got all kinds of problems. We've not gotten to the real life issues that any counselor will tell you. You have to get the immediate physical needs and the immediate problem under control before then you can address the larger problems and deeper issues of life. You can't deal with them until you deal with things like hunger and physical exhaustion. When you are depressed or discouraged, there are 3 things you need right off the bat in the beginning, and God made sure Elijah got all 3 of them. You need some good food, you need some good rest, and you need some physical exercise. Although this story is 3,000 years old, that would still be the same prescription that would be given you if you went to a good psychologist today. You need some good food, you need some rest, you need some physical exercise to start. You need more than that, but that's a good place to begin. And then he has to face his fears. He simply has to. He got up and ate and drank, and the food gave him enough strength to travel 40 days and 40 nights to Mount Sinai, the mountain of God. Then he came to a cave where he spent the night, but the Lord said to him, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Wow. Now that's a good question. The last time we saw Elijah, he had been winning a great victory for God on Mount Carmel. So what is he doing cowering in a cave hundreds of miles away? Not that the Lord didn't know. The question was not for God's benefit, but for Elijah's, self-introspectively. God is really saying in modern terms, "So explain yourself, son. You were up there on Mount Carmel winning, and now you're down here. What are you doing here?" It's time, Elijah, for you to face your fears. Now, I love Elijah's response because it's 2/3 true. You ever heard a statement that's powerful, and partly true, but not fully true? Elijah answered the question, "What are you doing here?" by saying, "I have zealously served the Lord God Almighty. But the people of Israel have broken their covenant with you, torn down your altars, and killed every one of your prophets. I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too." Now I want you to notice, most everything he said was true. He had been zealous. The people had rejected the covenant. The people had put the prophets to death. No exaggeration at all. If he had stopped there, he would have been on solid ground. But look at the next sentence. I am the only one left. And now they're trying to kill me too. Now, the last part of that sentence is true too. They were still trying to kill him, but the first part of that sentence is not. That first part, the feeling of being utterly alone, I am the only one left, that needed an adjustment. You see, he had gone so far in his depression that self-pity was setting in, and he thought he was the only one righteous man left in Israel. Now let me stop at this point and make a simple application. Self-pity is the enemy of all spiritual growth. Self-pity is the enemy of all spiritual. If you don't get past self-pity, you're not growing. You're not going anywhere. I love what the great actor Jimmy Stewart once said: the true Christian reaction to suffering and sorrow is not the attitude of self-pity, fatalism, or resentment. It is the spirit which takes life's difficulties as a God-given opportunity and regards its troubles as a sacred trust and wears the thorns as a crown. No self-pity, no blaming your wife or your husband, no blaming your colleagues, no blaming your parents, no blaming your inner tendencies, no blaming something that happened to you when you were a child. Self-pity is the enemy of all spiritual growth. Because, my friends, as long as you feel sorry for yourself, you cannot get better. As long as you blame others, you cannot get better. As long as you try to throw off your problems on somebody else, you can't get better. And as long as you say, like Elijah did, I alone am left, O Lord, I'm the only one faithful, I'm the only one on your team. As long as you talk like that, you can't get better. As long as you say, I have the original problem that nobody else has and understands, like God has never seen it before, you can't get better. Some people are stuck spiritually and emotionally and mentally and physically because they are wallowing in a sea of self-pity. And they have convinced themselves that all of their problems are caused by other people, so they make a living blaming their circumstances and other people for their problems and then wonder why they aren't getting better. They're stuck, and they will stay stuck until they stop making excuses and start taking responsibility. And that's why God said to Elijah, what are you doing here, Elijah? He needed to face his fears and take responsibility. But he needed more than that. He also needed to see a new, fresh vision of God again. When he begins to wallow in self-pity, I want you to see how God responds, or more particularly, what God doesn't do. He doesn't say what many of us would have done or said, and frankly, in the early years before I experienced depression, what I said. What's wrong with you? Get it together. Come on, snap out of it. Get a grip. All the wrong things to say. He doesn't put Elijah down. He doesn't ridicule him. Instead, he meets him at the point of his deepest despair, and he says, son, come with me. Get up, get out of your cave, get some rest, get some food. Let's go out. I want to show you something. He doesn't condemn him. Condemning depressed people doesn't work. It doesn't help when we're depressed if somebody condemns us, and it doesn't help for us to condemn somebody else. It just makes the situation worse. So watch what he does. What follows is amazing. God says to Elijah, go out and stand before me on the mountain. And as Elijah stood there, the Lord passed by, and a mighty windstorm hit the mountain. It was such a terrible blast that the rocks were turned loose, but the Lord was not in the wind. After the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, there was a fire, But the Lord was not in the fire, and after the fire there was the sound of a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his cloak and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. And a voice said again, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Why does God put Elijah through this demonstration of divine power? He's trying to get Elijah back in touch with his spiritual reality. He's trying to help him see to be still and know that I am God. You know, we often meet God in the small, still, forgotten places of life. A few months ago, I was complaining about something that happened at home. Doesn't matter what it was. My wife listened to me, and she listened to me, and she listened to me, and finally she decided she had had enough, and so she said what wives have been saying to complaining husbands since the beginning of time, 2 words: grow up. Now, I didn't like that at all. I didn't want to hear that. For one thing, I didn't want to grow up. I wanted to complain. But she knew how to say it, and the way to say it is sometimes as important as what you say. And she said, you know, God has been good to us. Let's just look for a while at the way that God has been good to us and has blessed us. And so we started doing that, and I started looking for all the blessings of God and everything around and all the good things. You know what we found? We found that there was just one thing that I was ticked off about and concerned about, and there were dozens and dozens of things that I was blessed and happy for. We learned that if you keep your eyes open for God, pretty soon you'll see him almost everywhere. Our problem is we want to see the earthquake all the time. We want to see the fire all the time. We want the big demonstration. We want the spectacular answer to prayer. And God says that's not always where you're going to see me. Sometimes you're going to see me in the still small voice. Be still and know that I am God. One last thing. Elijah needed a new challenge. In verse 13, we just noticed God repeats his question. What are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah repeats his answer. So now God is going to give him some accurate information rather than inaccurate. The Lord told him, go back the same way you came. Travel to the wilderness of Damascus. When you arrive there, anoint Hazael to be the king of Aram. Then anoint Jehu, grandson of Nimshi, to be the king of Israel. And anoint Elisha, the son of Shaphat, from the town of Abel-Meholah, to replace you as my prophet. Anyone who escapes from Hazael will be killed by Jehu, and those who escape Jehu will be killed by Elisha. I will preserve 7,000 others in Israel who have never bowed down to Baal or kissed him. I want you to notice all that God said there. First, he said, get back to work. Get back to doing what you're supposed to do. Get back to doing prophet stuff. And then he's reminding Elijah he's not alone. Not only is God with him, he has 7,000 more in Israel who have not bowed down to Baal. You are not alone. I've got 7,000 more like you, he said. And not only that, but I'm going to give you a man to be your protege, your partner, and your successor. Elisha, you were never alone. You're not alone now. You're not going to be alone in the future. These 7,000 people, especially Elisha, are going to help you. Now listen as I close with these thoughts on depression. When you are depressed, you have a tendency to not make good evaluations. One of my mentors, Coach Buck Dozier, told me and others when we were in high school, over and over again, never make a decision when you are depressed. Never make a decision when you're depressed. 99% of the time, be the wrong decision. And when I have made decisions when I've been depressed in my life, that has proven to be true. It has always been wrong. Because we are not in a position to evaluate our own effectiveness when we are discouraged or depressed. Elijah, one of the greatest men of God ever, is a perfect example of that. When you think you have won, don't be so sure, as Elijah shows us. When you think you have failed, don't be so sure, as Elijah shows us. We are just as likely as Elijah to wrongly estimate the power and influence of both our victories and our defeats. Best to just do our best and leave the results with God. You see, if Satan cannot get to us externally, he will try to get to us internally. It's no surprise to me that Elijah's greatest victory and his greatest defeat came back to back, just hours apart. It is not a sin to be discouraged. It is not a sin to be depressed. It's what you do when you realize that you are discouraged or depressed or feeling hopeless that matters. Don't fight the battle alone. Get some help. Get all the help you need, even if you need professional help. And remember this, God is still there. There is no pit so deep that the love of God is not deeper still. Catch it early, because depression is like a spiral. And if you're prone to it, if you can catch it when it gets here, you're much better off if you don't catch it until it gets to here, and certainly if it hits rock bottom. So learn the symptoms and catch it here and start doing the things that God told Elijah, and you will find yourself encouraged by the power of God rather than discouraged by the fear that Satan produces in you. God bless you.